Borthakur IAS Academy. Prostuti aru adhyayoner nirbhorjogyo thikona. Borthakur IAS Academy.
Hello everyone, welcome to Hindu Analysis for 31st July 2021. Let us begin with the first article today. As promised yesterday, we are going to discuss yesterday's editorial that I found to be very interesting today. That editorial is a long road to winning the battle against trafficking. This is in the backdrop of a new trafficking bill being discussed and passed in the assembly right now, or in the parliament right now. And this bill goes into the draft propositions that are being made, and we'll be discussing about what are the issues, outstanding issues currently India faces as of right now in regards to the laws that surround trafficking or anti-trafficking, and where do the problems lie in implementing them. Now, as far as yesterday is concerned, July 30, as I repeated yesterday, July 30 is recognized as United Nations World Day Against Trafficking in Persons. Now, let us get into the article. Now, between April 2020 and June 2021, an estimated 9,000 children have been rescued after being trafficked for labor, according to a child's right non-governmental organization. Now, this is one non-governmental organization that is actively working towards preventing child trafficking or human trafficking, as one identifies it. Now, just look at the numbers. 9,000 in a span of 1 year, right? That's a huge number. It shows the scale of the problem, or the problem of either the child trafficking or human trafficking in India. Then the question comes, or we can ask a question, seeing that numbers. If this is the case with one non-governmental organization, imagine the number of cases that go unreported, and the underreporting in this situation is so high that it is actually depressing to look at. Now, according to the same NGO and some other experts in that field, children as young as 12 are being trafficked across states to work in factories in appalling conditions, where owners of the factories are turning to cheap labor to recoup their losses from the novel coronavirus pandemic. Now, does that mean that are we seeing these kinds of trafficking, or high levels of high percentage of children trafficking or human trafficking only because of coronavirus? The answer is no. Sadly, it's an everyday affair in our country and in and around the world also. But what made the entire thing more worse is pandemic. So when you say that, let us say pre-pandemic levels, close to 1,000 children are being trafficked across state lines, from one place to their place in some other country. But because of the pandemic, because the economic difficulties that it brought upon people who are already vulnerable, the number rose up to significant levels. And that's the sad part about it. So, pre-corona also there was issues of child trafficking. What coronavirus essentially did it is, it created a huge demand for cheap labor. As a direct result of it, more children are being trafficked across state lines. Now, why are these kids or humans are being trafficked one place to other place? The simple answer is, as we discussed earlier, cheap labor. The pandemic resulted in loss of income and economic crisis in many families across India. If the family is already economically weaker, economically limited, their ability to earn a living was taken away from them by the restrictions imposed during COVID-19. Or for whatever reason, but COVID-19 had a direct impact on their ability to earn a living, and it has resulted in loss of income to their families and led to that economic crisis, which results the families' ability to care for the children, right? They cannot feed their children, they cannot take care of their children, either in the short term or in the long term. Remember, these families are economically challenged as they are, and on compound to that, you add the COVID-19 pandemic, which took away everything. Even if earlier, if pre-pandemic levels, if they were able to simply earn a living through daily wages or doing odd works here and there, that ability was also taken away from them. Now, when you look at it from a statistical perspective, their ability to recover from that economic crisis is impossible. So as a result of that, families' ability to take care of their children either in the short term or in the long term is gone. Now, as a result of this, families, in order to come out of the economic crisis that they are in, they are looking towards ways where they can utilize every potential body in the house to earn a living. Right, that involves kids, even though kids, according to Indian laws, according to ethics, or whatever it is, kids aren't supposed to be put under stress or put under labor. They are forced to do it because they cannot earn a living to sustain. Now, the other factor that we have to consider in this scenario is loss of parents due to COVID-19. Right? You are seeing a huge influx or huge numbers of kids whose parents have lost their lives due to COVID-19 or illnesses associated to it, or kids are being separated from their families for whatever reason because of COVID-19. Now, these kinds of lack of parental care or guardianship or somebody to care for them puts these kinds of children at heightened risk for violence, neglect, and exploitation. So when a child is employed in a factory, they are prone to violence because somebody is going to beat them up if they don't do their job in a way that is satisfactory. Nobody is going to care for them, whether they were eating properly, whether they were maintaining the hygiene standards or whatever it is. And at the end of the day, they are going to be exploited for profits. So these are the two factors. One, the loss of economy, loss of income, which directly led to their economic crisis, which prevents their families to care for them in long term. So parents put their children to work so that they also earn some money into the family. In the other case, the worst case scenario, these kids lose their parents' care due to their death, their illness, or any other kind of separation that is brought on by COVID-19 or its surrounding ripple effects, thereby placing the children in the risk zone of violence, neglect, and exploitation. Now, when you have these two kinds of powerful reasons behind having high numbers of children being trafficked, the other issue on the other side of the spectrum, the checks and balances end of the spectrum, is we are seeing some erosion in the standard checks against child labor and child marriage provided by law. Now, at one stage, it is understandable that certain percentage of scrutiny has to be done at school and societal level. But for whatever reasons, lack of awareness, awareness of laws, or for whatever reason, non-compliance, you can say any reason. But sadly, the scrutiny at school levels, either it may be a private school or a government school, or at societal levels, is negligibly low. Now, on top of all law, and not only that, if there was a nascent possibility that schools, private or government, even the faculty or the staff of the school, could have picked up certain hints as to whether the child is being put through some kind of a child going through some sort of a situation, either it may be a work or a marriage, which is against their this thing. Schools would have had the ability to find out or keep a tab on kids and their welfare. But because of pandemic, these schools are closed right now. So earlier, these kids who are under heightened risk of violence, neglect and exploitation, they had this ability to be noticed by staff of a school. Now with the school closed, they are not going out because of complete lockdowns. They are stuck in a place where they are for sure in certain cases are going to be prone to violence, neglect and exploitation. Society also, because of the conditions imposed by COVID-19, there is no third eye that would provide a small window for people to notice that a child is being exploited there. So that's the issue. We had a certain, or at least there was a hope that kids who are being exploited would be identified during their schooling or in their schools. But with that closed, even that hope is also gone out of the window. Now the worst aspect of all this is the access to internet. Right? We are seeing a high percentage or an increase in the percentage of cyber trafficking. Many popular social media platforms and free messaging apps, there are empty number of free messaging apps that nobody can trace where the message comes from or where the message goes. And these tools, these online communication tools are being used to contact young people, entrap them. They are trying to lure these people in the pretext of giving them employment, giving them money, giving them all the luxuries. And then they are being trafficked by either a trafficker himself or some middleman. So that has become a huge booming business during this period. Not only the pandemic, the things associated, because of the high presence of people online due to COVID-19, the percentage of people being entrapped by these traffickers or middlemen has also significantly gone up. The worrisome aspect of it is young people are being targeted. Young people are being specifically picked out of a lineup and they are being targeted. Once they are trafficked, with the threats of violence from the trafficker or the middleman, these threats make it for the person who has been trafficked to report this incident to police or even any other authority, because at the end of the day, if you are a trafficked person, the first individual that comes to mind or the authority that comes to mind is police. So the negative impact of that is there aren't any proper authorities that these persons who are trafficked can approach for safety, for protection apart from police. Even the police, there is no guarantee that they'll be granted protection, because at the end of the day there are a lot of factors that go into it also. So the threats of violence, the lack of a proper authority or a friendly authority to approach to make their case that they are being trafficked against their will, they are being held against their will, they need protection, they need safety and security. Lack of a proper friendly authority, lack of a proper accessible authority to these people, most of these cases are also unreported. They don't get reported in the way that they should have been or should be. Now, as of now, as I said, the aspect of cyber trafficking has gone up. These traffickers are taking advantage of the economic crisis that families are facing because of loss of livelihood. And the second aspect of it, because people are stuck at home because of free access or liberal access to internet, they are using these two things to entrap victims. As I said, they are issuing false advertisements on social media. They are luring people, saying that we'll give you employment, we'll give you comforts of life or whatever it is. We'll try to help you in growing up or whatever. And they are using all the tropes in the book to entrap somebody, and they are entrapping particularly young victims. And there is a perversion side of this thing where people who are mentally ill, who are currently stuck at home, because of their perversions, we are seeing an increased demand for child sexual exploitation material online due to lockdowns. So for somebody's perversion, innocent kids are being sexually exploited. Even then, it is very hard to narrow these people, because there are hundreds of platforms on the web, on the online dark web or whatever it is, where such kinds of children being exploited gets shared from one person to the other person. It becomes virtually impossible to keep a lid on these things. Even look at Twitter. Twitter was recently, actually Twitter is facing a case in India where they are being accused of encouraging child pornography. Yeah, Twitter is one place where child pornography gets exchanged from one person to other person, or gets disseminated into groups where one person releases it to a large people of perverted people. Now that's again a disheartening situation where, because of people who are stuck in homes, because of their own perversions, because of their own mental health issues, we are seeing an increased demand for child sexual exploitation material online. Now these are the compounding issues. You have the economic loss, the loss of livelihood. You have the second aspect of people spending more time online. There is a high demand for child sexual exploitation material and other such perverting material online. As a result of this, traffickers and middlemen are using this opportunity, using all their tools, all their tropes in the book to entrap people and traffic them. Because of lack of a friendly face, lack of a proper authority for the victims to reach out and make their case seeking protection and security, these cases are also not being reported, because we don't have a proper mechanism in place to help these people. Now these are the compounding issues. As a result of this, we are seeing high percentage of people being trafficked across state lines, particularly children, for cheap labor and very other negative things. Now let us look at the second side of the situation. What are the laws that are trying to control these kinds of exploitation? There are many schemes that were launched by various ministries in India, but the problem simply boils down to implementation. India suffers from a systemic failure of implementation of existing schemes. I'm not the first person to say this, and I'm pretty sure I'm not going to be the last person to say this. India doesn't need new laws. What India needs is effective implementation systems, effective implementation management. We need the existing laws to be implemented to their letter in a proper and systemic fashion. The nodal agency for these kinds of investigations is Ministry of Home Affairs, right? The Ministry of Home Affairs had brought in many schemes that try to improve investigation and prosecution of cyber crimes, but the results are yet to be seen. India's standing in the world is, the benchmark is set by US Department of State, US State Department, that has the best parameters to measure a country as to how it is doing in terms of human trafficking. And in their rankings, India is listed as a Tier 2 country. What it essentially means that Indian government does not fully meet the minimum standards under the US and international law for eliminating human trafficking, but it is making significant efforts to comply. Remember, when we are making significant efforts to comply, it is not only the government of India that is doing it. There are various other NGOs that are tirelessly working to address this issue. Can you say that laws are not sufficient in India? No. Laws are actually pretty good. We need certain changes in them to bring more sensitivity to the issue. But whatever the laws we have, if implemented currently, we can actually changes in this dark side of our society. Now again, let us look at one of the key examples or key schemes that was brought in to address this issue. In 2010, the idea of anti-human trafficking units was brought up. Anti-human trafficking units are specialized district level task forces. Anti-human trafficking units are specialized district level task forces, not only comprising of police but also government officials. In 2010, it was decided that 330 anti-human trafficking units would be set up. When an RTA response was requisitioned in August of 2020, it showed that only 225 have been set up. Now, when you look at investigation, see, there is also this problem of these cases not being investigated properly. Now, before going into that, what we need right now is a larger framework to protect women and children by incentivizing education and creating a safe employment opportunities. That is one aspect that we also have to look in order to address this issue. Once we kind of bring in safeguards, mind you, not in letter but in practicality, in reality, if you bring in that aspect of framework to protect women and children, all while incentivizing education and creating a safe environment for them, then this issue can be solved, or at least this issue kinds of gets some sort of a respite so that we can work in other areas to address this problem. Now, the point that the author of this article is highlighting here is that there is no shortage of anti-trafficking policy in India. As I said earlier, where the system is found lacking is in its implementation of laws. At this point, it is global standard in legal jurisprudence that stringent laws do not solve problems. Even if you bring death penalty, the problem isn't going to go away. Let us look at the case of molestation, rape. Death penalty is being awarded to people who are convicted and found guilty. Even though there is death penalty for molestation and rape, we are seeing an increasing number of assault on women on a daily basis. So the threat that the idea that more stringent laws will solve the problem is no longer holds water. They don't have any effect to deter a person from committing the crime. So, to repeat myself again, there is no shortage of anti-trafficking policy in India. Where we suffer from is implementation. The idea that we need more stringent laws doesn't hold water, because it is found repeatedly again and again that even if you award death penalty for something, it doesn't prevent somebody from committing the same crime, because it doesn't have that effect of deterrence on a person who is willing to commit that kinds of crime. The only solution at this point of time is political will. Like anything, legislation is not the end-all solution to everything. The political will is what ensures that the legislation gets implemented. So at the end of the day, whatever the systemic problems that we are suffering should start, or the reform should start from the point of political will. Once the political will is well established, well expressed, these kinds of things tend to get implemented in a much faster way and in a much better way, because there is political will behind it. And when political will is expressed very clearly, they expect results, then officials kind of tend to do the work, because there would be some fallout of not following those orders. Now, as I said, the next aspect of it is failure to investigate. Again, the conviction rates in these cases are very low. The new draft bill, there is a provision that that kind of states that accused traffickers must be presumed guilty unless they can be proven the contrary. Again, that interpretation leaves scope for it being exploited against people. Again, that's a possibility. Now, what the problem is, because of lack of high percentage of convictions, the investigation does not take its proper course. What is the reward for an investigation officer? When you look at it from that perspective, the reward for an investigation officer who is conducting an investigation into a trafficking case or any other criminal activity is conviction. If the investigation officer gets his conviction, it means that the procedure is working. Because of these low levels of conviction rates, the investigation is not being conducted in a proper way, because the investigation officer doesn't see his incentive, that is conviction. So again, there is that issue. So what is the solution there? You have to increase your convictions rate, you have to improve your investigation procedures, you have to bring in more transparency into investigation procedures, so that you see high conviction rates at the end of the day, which incentivizes investigation officers to perform an impeccable investigation. Now, that issue cannot be solved by simply bringing in an amendment that a person who is accused to be a trafficker is assumed guilty unless they can prove otherwise. It puts the burden on the accused and not the investigation officer. Remember, that takes away some sort of pressure on the investigation officer, again reducing the quality of the investigation altogether. Now, the second thing that the author of this article suggests is proper case management must be introduced, so that fast track courts can actually do their work in a proper and an efficient way. And the other problems in this regard include the low number of beneficiaries of monetary compensation, and the final aspect, the mental psyche. A person who has gone through all these hardships in their life kind of tend to have some sort of mental issues, right? They get affected. Their psychologically, they're affected. Then what is the need is for them to be psychologically counseled. That also needs to be done, which is being done to a good extent, but not to the extent that actually makes a difference in the person's life. As we discussed in the beginning of the article, most of the victims are from low-income communities where the pandemic ravaged their entire livelihood and split their families. Not only that, the subsequent lockdowns that followed have caused long-term financial distress in their own families. Because of that, they lost their ability to take care of their children in the long term. So, the idea that once this pandemic reduces and we return to normalcy, we'll see a reduction in incidences of trafficking, the answer is, we don't know. We cannot say that. But if you go by the evidence and if you go by the statistics, we will certainly not see any reduction in trafficking. We may see a small dip, but again it will resume to its original levels. So again, to conclude it, the failure of existing institutional mechanisms to foresee the present crisis should spur the government and other stakeholders to take preventive action now. Now that should be the way. Prevention should be the best solution to human trafficking in our country, particularly child trafficking. This is an important editorial in terms of both ethics, in terms of polity, and in terms of governance. Hope you understood what I was trying to achieve here. So moving on to the next article, 12th rounds of talks today. China and India to hold 12th round of talks today. Now, as of today, I think it starts at 10:30 a.m. 12th round of corps commander level talks are to be conducted between India and China to discuss second phase of disengagement from Gogra and hot springs in eastern Ladakh. In the 11th round of corps commander talks, China refused to acknowledge either the Gogra and hot spring areas. Now Indian side is hopeful that we'll find a solution or work out some sort of an agreement on the second phase of disengagement from both Gogra and hot springs areas in eastern Ladakh. Now remember, further friction areas like Demchok and the Depsang plains are still very much in play. Particularly the worrisome region is the Depsang plains, where the Chinese have advantage over our positions. And this is where, according to multiple news reports, where the Chinese have intruded very far into our territory. And as of now, Pangong Lake has been certainly agreed upon for a certain point, because we agreed that we are not going to conduct a patrol in those areas till certain finger points. Now, again, disengagement is complete at patrol points 15 and 17A in Gogra and hot spring areas. But nonetheless, the complete disengagement from this area is yet to be seen. There are still structures in place that the Chinese have built that have to be razed down, and the landscape be brought back to its pre-April timeline. Now this would be again the 12th one. We are still hopeful that a complete solution to the border situation will be brought through talks. But remember, China is happy with the way things are right now. As we discussed in earlier classes, the more distracted India is in eastern Ladakh and surrounding areas, the better it is for Chinese in other regions. So if the other party in the negotiations, if there are two parties in a negotiation and the second party does not want a solution, whatever the first party does to get the problem resolved, the solution is going to still persist. That is what we are suffering. Here party 1 is India. We are hoping that we solve the border issue. Here party 2 is China. It doesn't want a solution because it is more advantageous for them for this problem to persist than solve it. So they are going to do everything in their power to ensure that the status quo remains same. Now moving on to the next article, BRICS plan to counter terror finalized government. Now the BRICS counter terrorism action plan that is supposed to strengthen counter terror cooperation among the member states has been finalized. Now a 6th meeting of BRICS counter terrorism working group was held a few days back, and finally the Ministry of External Affairs announced that an action plan will bring result-oriented cooperation between all the member states of BRICS grouping. Now again, BRICS is Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. Now the concentration seems to be going directed towards South Africa, Sahel region, where there are a lot of threats from various terror organizations. And this working group or this counter-terrorism group from BRICS grouping will certainly divert some of their resources into that region to shore up their allies in Africa. But again, that is yet to be seen. One of the but remember, South Africa is though interested, but there are other factors that also needed to be looked if resources are being diverted there. Again, this is to counter terrorism, not only from their soil but also from other regions. Now this is to enhance their ability to fight terror, their ability to enhance counter-terrorism cooperation, and this is again in line with their action plan to ensure they work on a single agenda to prevent terror attacks from taking place in their respective countries. Thank you. Stay safe. Namaste.
Borthakur IAS Academy. প্রস্তুতি আৰু অধ্যয়নৰ নিৰ্ভৰযোগ্য ঠিকনা।
Borthakur IAS Academy.